What's up, y'all? Welcome to You Just Freestyled. I'm Ronald James, and today we're going to be trying a different, or I'm going to say attempting a different mic placement, so that eventually we figure out the EQing for all this. But I got the classroom norms. Maybe you hear the paper in the background. But that is clear communication. So clear communicating your thoughts or your ideas. Whether that be in the comments or just to people that you're around, literally learning the art of communication, which is a part of freestyle, no matter how you're using the freestyle. Respect, which is respecting yourself and others. Project and be heard, which is literally projecting using your voice, which I am working on doing correctly into the microphone so that it doesn't blow when I put the video up and then you're listening to it in headphones. Haha. Positive encouragement, which is always helpful for any endeavor. And everyone has different forms of positive encouragement, as I'm finding out. Some people like to be told what they're doing wrong or what they could improve on, and to them that's positive. Whereas some people just want you to be like, just kind of feed into what it is they're doing. Like, they might realize they're doing something wrong, but if you can give them criticism or somehow word it in a way where what's like a really great example of that? Hey, if you were to add a bit more melody in that section, I think what you're doing would come off well. It's like, it's possibly not the best example I could have given at the moment, but it's almost like it's not criticism. It's literally, and you're saying this from a real place. You're not lying to them, but you're like, hey, this thing that I noticed, if you were wanting my opinion, which everyone doesn't want, could help you achieve the thing that you're looking to achieve. Yeah. Encouragement of self-study, which we've already gone off, and self-love. Encouragement of self-study is, of course, important because just in case I don't know what I'm talking about, or you find that something that I am talking about works differently for you, but you achieve the same result, self-study might help you get there. And then self-love is, of course, just important for a variety of reasons, but giving yourself positive talk and positive feedback can be the most important thing that you'll possibly do in any field that you go into, whether it be art or not art, just in general day-to-day life. So definitely know that we've added some other ones, so I believe that at some point I'll rewatch all the videos again, which I have been doing. Look at me, learning and self-studying, so that we can, wrap up all the class norms together. So this episode might be a bit shorter, but I think what I want to talk about today is learning different flows and languages through various mediums of not just hip hop, but styles and studying. So starting off with that, have you ever heard a call in like auctioneering? And I'm learning auctioneering calls, so if you still feel like flambeing me for this, go ahead. But 45, 50, 55, 50, 55, 60, 65, 60, can I get 70? Can I get 70, 80, 80? Can I get 90, 99, 95, 95, 92, 93, 99? Now I got 90. That kind of vibe and cadence, right? And someone possibly has done it, and I just haven't heard it yet. If you know any songs, please put them in the comments, because I would love to listen to them. But I was like, I've never heard anyone do an auctioneering call in a rap song yet, or a hip hop song. Like, I've never heard anyone even parody it yet. And why is that? And then I went and looked up some videos on auctioneering. And it's like, of course, like, with anything else, there's the whole science, and there's an art to it, and there's a way that you perform the auctioneering call. So what you want to do is basically find things that aren't necessarily in hip hop and bring them into hip hop. it's another way of sampling, basically. Um, so with respect to culture, though, still, right? Because you don't want to, and maybe people might feel differently about this. You don't want to borrow or take or sample from a culture where what you're doing is considered a disrespectful parody or somehow degrading the art form. I don't know if that'll always be a thing for some people, and I'm not even necessarily sure of what examples I could give at this moment, but kind of like that idea of like, oh, there was this one thing or this way that this culture speaks and I thought it was really cool, so I brought it over here. Whereas other people might be like, I didn't ever think about that, and it ends up being successful with that culture and they don't feel like it was at all a parody or a perversion of what their way of life or speech or culture or communication is. How would you find that out, or how would you know that? Probably your intuition, because if you look at it logically, there might be a lot of stuff to unpack there. But definitely when you're sampling or borrowing from a culture, maybe attempt to always come from a place of love and respect. And possibly if that miscommunication still happens, you'll at least be able to say in truth and honesty, hey, like, I didn't realize what I was doing was offensive. So my apologies. That might not fix anything, but at least you can say from a truthful place, like, I was doing this in the wanting to exemplify something I saw beauty in. So also in the same aspect, you could also get that from listening to different forms of hip hop in different languages, which is, even if you don't understand the actual flows or you don't understand the words being used as of yet, you can still pick up on the flows and the patterns. I think a really good example of this is the hip hop triplet flow that you see pretty much like in so many different forms of not just hip hop music, but in music in general that is not of an English nature. But you hear the da 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 the same flows, and it's like a lot of people attribute that to Migos. Of course, that flow pattern existed before that. Triplicates, if I'm not mistaken, still doing music theory research, is something that exists in music in general outside of just hip hop. Like, it's a musical structure, so it exists in music overall. But in the sense of rap, where a lot of people have gotten it from is from artists like the Migos and from people in Atlanta, and prior to that, other artists who would have used triplets. Like, it shows up in New York rap, it shows up like in a lot of places. So, wherever you happen to find it, they don't, in some cases, necessarily speak English, but or haven't learned it yet, I'll say, or in the process of learning English. But even then, by consistently listening to the music, which you could call pattern recognition, which you could call a neural net, they have learned how to access the triplet flow, and then they can use it, adding their own words. And if you notice, they'll add words that are similar to whatever the word in English is. So whatever the bars are ending in English, in the language that it's been transferred over to, the words are not maybe even necessarily the same context as the English words, but they end in the same way. They flow in the same pattern in a lot of cases. And that just kind of shows you that you can still learn something and not fully, and maybe not that you even need to. You don't need to speak the English language to master a triplet flow. It's like you could just keep listening to it until you're like, you've translated it enough into your own language that it makes sense. And then in the process, you might learn some English as well. If you've noticed too, a lot of hip hop music, tons of hip hop music will borrow words from other cultures like Spanish. Japanese is really popular. Chinese dialects that don't, but they're not. It might just be a moment, or it might be like, depending on who you're asking, good or bad imitation of the words or of the idea they're wanting to get across, and then they're back into the English, or they're back into, if you're listening to a song in a different language, they're back into the language that the song started in. But they gave you a moment of that, and even by doing that, you pick up all of these words. Like, you know what I mean? Whether you decide to use them and build on that and actually learn or continue to learn the language is up to you. But it's the idea of being around the words creates this repetition, creates this pattern, creates this neural map in your mind where you're able to, at least when you hear the word, you're like, oh, that's from this language or this culture. Or at least you might even be like, I think this word might be from this language or this culture. And you could be incorrect, but by having constantly been in a realm where you're hearing words that aren't necessarily English, and by the way, a lot of English words don't originally originate in English, which is really funny when you think about it. But you've come to a point where you're like, oh, that word might be from a different culture or language than what I would normally speak, which is pretty helpful when you're learning other things, right? So if you don't have subtitles for that actual music, right? Once again, just listen to the track over and over again. Something I like to do on YouTube a lot is if you go on to the cog, which is the settings, on somewhere on the video, or depending on if you're using desktop or mobile, you can speed up or slow down the song, which is the playback speed function. And when you speed up the song, it's really cool because you can actually hear how the flows go in an uninterrupted pattern. So for instance, like, say someone's using a really spaced out, really slowed down flow. By having it sped up, you can hear how the bars and the flows connect in. Well, it's still happening real time when they're rapping it slow and spaced out, but you can hear how the bars and how the flow connects while it's going really fast. If you slow it down, you might notice how they're hitting certain beats or cadences, or like where the instrumental is at in relation to them. You can still notice this while it's going faster. I've just noticed that like playing it at different speeds helps you notice different things. The ad-libs might stick out more. The way that the hook is into or dancing on top of the instrumental might stick out more. Same way with in a verse, you might hear them, the way that they're rapping more. I've also heard that too, it can be disorienting for some individuals. Like maybe like if you're from Texas and you listen to a lot of Chopped and Screwed, or you're from an area where Chopped and Screwed is very popular, slowed down music might not be at all uncomfortable for you. Also, if you listen to a lot of rappers who have the ability to rap super, super fast and still stay, in the pocket, that also might not be uncomfortable for you to listen to it faster, but it may be like some form of a learning curve there. So if you're going to do it, I would say like just test it out on a few songs that you already know really well and that you like, so that once again, by using that familiarity and that association, you're building a comfort level with it rather than just dropping yourself into it, which you also, if you feel like it, could do. But if you're also like, this is really uncomfortable, then just use what you know and build off of that. So using, which is kind of similar, I guess, to like anime or manga, or really anything that has a cultural relation to the language, the culture, or the place that you're learning about. I'm thinking about what other attributes you could attach to that. You can use this association with the languages as a way to slowly learn about that culture, or quickly, depending on how your brain works in relation to those things, or just how fast you pick those things up. Also in the same way though, I would say that maybe not everywhere, but a lot of hip hop music has been influenced by Western ideals and perceptions. So just because you're listening to a hip hop song and say a different language, it does not mean that that speaks for the entirety of the culture. Just like in the same way that you could watch a hip hop video from like a top 40 artist, and whether their story is true or not, that may not speak for the entire experience of the race of that person, the culture of that person, the ideas of that person. Kind of like where you'll see that disclaimer, the thoughts, ideas, and feelings of this person are not necessarily the thoughts, feelings, and ideals of the creator of whatever program that is. Same concept. I don't know if there's a person or an artist that literally speaks for the experience of everyone else. And if there is, that's awesome. I hope that they're speaking correctly and positively towards what we all want, if that's even possible. But definitely make sure when you're out here and you're using or experiencing other languages, which you're using your building, using your budding or your already established familiarity with hip hop and the art and the culture around it, to then branch out to these other cultures and begin to understand them. Remember, you're meeting them at their framework of understanding hip hop, which is also, depending on who you've asked, been colored by and perceived by a bunch of different people and groups and ideas. So necessarily even their framework of where they've gotten and understood hip hop at is not necessarily where you might understand or feel or believe it's from. Remember the story that someone told me where they met somebody and they kept attempting to speak to them like how they heard on hip hop songs, how they thought that people who identify as black and African American spoke. And at first he was really offended by it. He was like, I don't speak that way. That's not the way that I converse. And then he realized that this person who did not grow up with English as a first language had learned English through listening to hip hop. And from that, he was actually attempting to communicate from a real and authentic place. He wasn't attempting to be prejudiced. He just wanted to communicate. And I think when we come from it from that way, of genuinely wanting to communicate, there doesn't mean that there won't be mistakes or misconceptions. But the person will genuinely feel that what you're really wanting to do is communicate with them. What you're really wanting to get across is, hey, I'd like to speak to you, or I'd like to speak with you about this thing, or I'd like to even freestyle or rap with you. I actually have a few more things that I wanted to talk about on this topic, but I like where this is at, so I think we're gonna end with kids. If you know any kids who freestyle, yeah, I've been teaching these kind of classes for about 5 years now, and some of the most inventive, some of the craziest, some of the most interesting flows come from kids, because they don't have all the preconceived notions that you might build up, the habits that we've talked about, right? Even if they're good habits, you're not like, even if it becomes a subconscious or an unconscious thing, I'll always rap this way when I get this kind of beat, or I'll always do this until I break that pattern or go to the other thing. They don't even worry about filler words, and sometimes because of that, they might not have them. Or even if they do, they just keep rapping anyway, because they're just thinking about, I want to rap, I want to continue to get better, I'm going to keep doing it. Hanging around them reminds you that you most likely used to rap that way as well. You weren't so set in your ways. There wasn't so much even if it's unconscious background noise going on, so that you were able to reach and obtain what it is you were wanting to do. So if you got, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, if you happen to be a teacher yourself, or your friends have kids that you're close with, like, just listen to them rap with them, like, ask what their favorite artists are, and that can be really rewarding. It can be just like, it reminds you of the fearless creativity of a person that has not yet been, you could say, crushed, but shaped by this world to the extent where they don't even trust or believe in their intuition anymore, or at least not outright, or they have to remember that they did at one point. Because I guess you could argue a lot of freestyling is also intuition and listening and a exploration of self. And they're not afraid, just not afraid to rap and it not sound right, or the words get messed up. And some, granted, are, but I think because they're so much closer to, like, once again, that intuition and that idea, they're not worried about it. They're not worried about it. And if they are, they can, like, a lot of times they can quickly get over it and just continue to, I'm gonna get better. So end of lesson tools. We're getting better at that, huh? Spend some time thinking about some languages that you've heard in hip hop songs that aren't maybe your first language, and see if you can find some songs in that language. Definitely attempt to find subtitles. Closed caption is available on a lot of YouTube videos where either the person has taken the time, or they have a large machine behind them, like a label, that has also then taken the time to translate or subtitle their lyrics. So that can also be really helpful. Once again, even if you don't understand the lyrics, like, still just listen to the song. The point is to, once again, like the whole thing about triplets, the point is to absorb the culture, the song, the person's artistry. If you don't understand, and you can look this up for yourself, the more you listen to it, the more clearer, and the clearer it'll become. So you could learn the language and possibly more about the culture simply by listening to it. Not necessarily everything, but at least get yourself a foothold in understanding what it is that you're wanting to grow into. Yeah, I think I really want that to be the only into tool lesson. So there's that. Thank y'all for tuning in. This has been You Just Freestyled with Ronald James, and peace out, y'all. See you next time.
didn't expect.